In the greater London area, on a quiet road near the famous Crystal Palace, is the home of George Daniels. It is likely that few of his neighbors realize the worldwide recognition that is accorded to him in the field of horology. He has given his time freely to the affairs of the prestigious, worshipful company of clockmakers of which he is a member of the court. This once powerful guild traces its charter back to 1631. Among the honors to come his way, in 1974, he was awarded the Lord Mayor of London Annual Award for distinguished contribution in the arts and sciences and learning. You will soon understand why he won this prize. Hello, George. How are you?
Hi, Seth.
Nice
well,
to
and
see
you? Sit down.
You're hard at work, I see.
Well, yes.
I think it's interesting, George. I'd like to stick around with you for a minute
Well,
and
please, by all means, you're welcome to.
have you tell me how you go about all this.
Well, it depends on a variety of circumstances. Of course, first, one needs to have the incentive to make a watch. And so this, I wouldn't just sit down and make watches for the sake of making watches. There's got to be a particular reason. And usually one thinks of a new idea or an innovation that might help affect an improvement in rate, because even these days, although precision timekeeping is not of prime importance in watchmaking, nevertheless, it wouldn't look too good if one made a watch that didn't keep at least as good time as the best of the past, and one must try and get a little improvement into it as well. And then there's the question of who might the recipient of the watch be, if any?
Well, I'm thrilled to think you're going to make one for me of your own invention.
Well, I'm enjoying it, and you're a very discerning collector, and so I have to scratch my brains a bit, because I doubt there's very much you haven't seen in horology. But in the end, I think I came up with an idea that will satisfy you, because it'll represent a good-looking watch, which at the same time will make, I think, a contribution towards improved timekeeping by means of extra technical innovations that haven't previously been incorporated in a watch.
That's very exciting.
Well, with that in mind, I made some sketches, and I decided that what you needed was a precision chronometer watch with a special ability to overcome some of the disadvantages of earlier precision watches. For instance, the lever escapement is a fine escapement because you get impulse in both directions on the balance, and thus, of course, it's much more reliable in wear. On the other hand, the chronometer escapement is more detached and will keep a better rate. We can't get so good a rate from the lever because of the necessity for the oil. How then to get the advantages of the lever into the chronometer? And so what I've designed here is a watch with, in effect, two watches within one case. And here you see we have two mainspring barrels, two complete sets of train wheels, terminating in a double escapement, impulsing one balance. Now, each of those escapements is a chronometer escapement, and each will impulse the balance in its own direction.
That's fantastic. There's nothing like it.
Well, no, nothing like it, and I'm bound to say this one isn't made yet, so there may never be one like it. But I keep at it, this is a rough idea of how the escapement will plan out, you see. Of course, these sketches are pretty crude, but I'm bound to say they don't improve. You see, there's no point in making minutely detailed sketches of a one-off watch, because the great merit of this system is that one can change one's mind as one goes along and introduce features as the fancy takes them. So the sketches don't really get very much further than this, but you'll remember the sketches that you saw in the art of Breguet. They were as crude, if not cruder, which is some comfort to me. I decided in the end to change very slightly from this arrangement because there were certain disadvantages with supporting the balance cock, and so I went on and changed it to this arrangement, where I have a continuous bridge across here. Then I can secure the balance cock to the center, and the whole thing then has a more homogeneous appearance and looks like a single creation rather than a lot of little pieces stuck together.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it changes again slightly here, and this is how it's actually going to finish, with the cock slotted into this bridge across here, bringing about an altogether more smooth appearance. As to the external appearance of the watch, well, it'll come out like that. You see, and this has been...
look at that more closely.
This has been one of the great difficulties of this watch. You see, there are so many wheels in it that it was very difficult to get the hands to fall at a point that would give the dial balance and aesthetic appeal, which is vitally important to have. But I think, and I hope you agree, that this will represent a pleasant appearance. Here on the top are the seconds, and there's a device in the watch so that you can zero the seconds when you want to set the watch to time, because this is one of the most difficult aspects of setting a watch to time. So you don't just stop the hand, you actually zero it mechanically while the watch is going. And here on the left is an indicator to indicate how many hours to run before it needs rewinding, and on the right a thermometer, because it is one of the primarily important things in a watch that you should keep it running something near constant temperature if you can. So that's more or less as it'll turn out. Difficult to see from a sketch exactly what a watch will look like. But on the whole, out well enough, as we shall see in a moment. But after this watch, you see, then we go on.
You do figure all the angles in detail.
Well, that's vitally important, see, because precision timekeeping only comes from meticulously observing certain functions of the escapement. If you don't do that, the watch won't give off its best performance. And I've always made a feature in my own watches, even chronometers. You know, there was always the trouble in the old days that a chronometer might set in the pocket. But I designed mine so that they are self-starting when you wind them. They can't set in the pocket. And it can be done by careful experimenting with the angles. This is why one goes very carefully into it. All the angles are done, the drawings are done 10 times full size, you see, which makes it easy then to reduce it down to the watch. You just take a naught off the end and apply that measurement to the watch plate, and any errors you have are reduced by 10.
Let me ask you a peculiar question, George. Do you get to the point where you can visually tell whether or not your teeth are regular as you like them? So that it's not a case of putting them against a pantograph or anything? No, you do it with your eye eventually.
Well, you have an eye and you can see, as you can in most fields. You develop an eye for the thing, and what we're concerned with here is a good technical shape, a beautiful technical shape, because if it doesn't look beautiful, it really isn't good, and there's ways of making it beautiful and good, and proportions, so that the thing looks delicate, like not a mass of amateur machinery. It's very important to get the professional look. Here you see the impulse roller will have 2 impulse pallets, and the vertical impulse pin.
Incredible.
For moving from side to side.
Incredible.
This, of course, has got to be made on a vastly smaller scale, and I suppose this component, when completed, will be something like 3.7 millimeters in diameter, and it's got to have those 3 jewels fitted into it. And so it's going to be fairly meticulous work.
Those are ruby jewels, are they?
Ruby jewels, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I make those on this little machine over here and cut them to my own shapes. And here you see, this is the way the pallets will engage the escape wheel. This is a very rough sketch. Here is one wheel turning in this direction. Here is the other turning in this direction. This tooth is locked on the locking stone. The balance will turn to the right, carry the lever with it, unlock this wheel, which will fall onto that stone, while a tooth here will fall onto that impulse pallet. So it's a fairly fast-moving and complex action, but I think it'll add charm to the watch when it's completed. Of course, you won't be able to see what's happening in there.
Totally unique, George.
Well, it is unique. One only hopes that it proves beneficial in the end.
And then I see you've got some calculations here.
Well, yes.
Of teeth, I suppose, and train speeds and all of that type of thing.
You know, this is the calculation for the train determining the number of teeth that it will have in the wheels and pinions. Vitally important. You don't want the seconds hand going around once in every 67 seconds. It's going to go around once in 60 seconds. And
that's interesting.
And then you see experiments to determine the best impulse proportions for the escapement. When I've finally decided which of these it will be, then I shall go ahead and reduce it to make it.
That's marvelous. And you've moved on from here into actual metal now, haven't you?
Yes. Now, here you see the thing is roughly taking shape in here. You see, here are the basic components, and here is the main plate of the watch, you see.
Yes.
This has to be cut away and sunk to take all the wheels, because, of course, if you keep piling wheels one upon the other, the watch gets thicker and thicker. But you can devise the watch. These wheels go right through the plate and come onto a separate plate beneath, so that the wheels come either side of the plate and reduce the thickness of the watch.
You've already set a few of the jewels, haven't you?
Yes, the jewels are set and the train wheels are made, and they all actually go in and run, and I can put them in a moment and you can spin them round.
Is that so?
So it is coming on. Here are the two mainspring barrels. Here's the centre bridge, you see, which caused so much anguish in determining its final design.
Mm-hmm.
And the cock will fit in this slot here. And that again will reduce the thickness of the watch, you see, because the cock is set below the top plate. This is a feature, you remember I told you that Breguet was very keen on.
Yes.
And by those means you can reduce the watch, but it's not easy to do it unless one is concerned with an individual handmade watch. Then you can gain half millimetres, tenths of a millimetre all the way through. You only have to gain 10/10 of a millimetre, and your watch is a millimetre thinner. And all this you can do as you go along. So it's taking shape, and it's a relief to me, and I hope it is to you, to see it having got that far.
That's a great thrill. It's a great thrill, that's what it is.
Well, I'll put some pieces in there, shall I? And you can see how it goes. Shall we,
All right.
yeah? You see, the watch must be made like a piece of Meccano. Everything must fit exactly into its place. Otherwise, one finds that after each assembly, the action is different.
I'm always amazed, George, at the speed with which you do these things. It's incredible. And the steadiness of your hands. I've noted also that your hands look very powerful.
Well,
in comparison with, I think most people would think that you would be a person with terribly delicate, thin hands and fingers.
Well, that is a thing that people often do think about watchmakers, but you know, you may have noticed also that pianists, good pianists, usually have very large, powerful hands. And this is an asset, as it is in watchmaking or surgery, because you see, the more power you have in your hand, the more there is spare over above that which you're using. For instance, if you can grip 50 pounds and you need 5 pounds, you've got 45 pounds in hand for control. If you grip 50 pounds and you're trying to grip 45 pounds, you have almost no control over it. It's like using blunt tools. You know? So large hands are essential. So I advise you, if you want to take up watchmaking, grow bigger hands. So there you see, there's some of the components.
Beautiful.
There now, and they spin.
Really.
And there's more to go in, but we won't concern ourselves with those at the moment, and there are plenty more to be made.
George, how do you set up to make the escapement?
Much the same way as making the movement, although of course one has to work to very much finer limits. But there again, I will use a plate and build up the escapement on the plate, drilling the holes where required, perhaps even changing the plate altogether and starting again. But finally, the jig will be complete, and you see there are 2 pins in this plate, which will locate that plate to that, and I will do the same with the escapement plate, locate it to this and drill my holes through, and then it's the final positioning for the components of the escapement. Then it has to be jewelled and the cocks and bridges made, and there's a faint hope after that it might start working.
And then finally you're at the stage of dialing, aren't you?
Yes, there's the dial and the hands and the case to make. It goes on and on, you know.
Right.
But those, of course, you can't really design. You have to have the idea in your mind of how it's going to look and work it up from basic principles.
Yes.
But all the time, of course, one does have in one's mind the essential requirements of the watch, which do influence the manufacture of the case and dial. Of course, it's very difficult to visualize a completed watch from a drawing, and so, of course, there's little point in designing a case or a glass or hands. The stroke of the pencil is thicker than the stem of the hand, so it's a very difficult thing to do. If you designed it 4 or 5 times full size, you lose your sense of perspective. And so it's best to do it as one comes to it. I'll give you an example of that. You see here I've got some drawings of a watch which I made last year, and you'll see it's been necessary to make several different drawings of the dial of the watch in order to get the proportions roughly as I want them, but none of those drawings looks like a watch. But from it one gets an idea, and one can then visualize in the mind exactly what it's going to look like. These are some sketches for the mechanism of that same watch, which was quite a complicated remontoire watch with a tourbillon escapement. And as it happened, in the end, when I finished the watch, it didn't look like any of those.
That's so.
But at least I discovered from this what I didn't want. And I've always said, you know, that if you know what you don't want, you're halfway to knowing what you do want. Now, you've seen those drawings. They're pretty crude, and you couldn't really tell what the watch would come out like from there, but you see, here's the watch, and although it looks like none of the drawings, I hope you agree with me that it turned out all right.
It's superb. It's just superb.
This
has a remontoire in it, does it?
Yeah. It's very difficult, you know, to beat the old watchmakers, and in particular Breguet, but you can do it if you struggle for long enough. And that watch contains both a remontoire rewinding it every 15 seconds and the tourbillon carriage with a reversed spring deafened escapement. So it takes advantage of all the best known features.
Never was such a thing.
Well,
there is now. That's simply marvelous.
Well, it's quite amusing to make.
And look at the detail here of your bow. The bow itself has just beautiful.
Well, you see, this arises out of the desire for functional elegance rather than a simple function of operation.
Right.
I take the same view of Breguet. You know, I don't really mind if my clients have to work hard at running their watches. That's not my problem. My concern is to make a beautiful watch. So you have to wind this watch with a key. You see, I won't make a watch that winds with a crown. If you do that, you need a large crowned grip. That large crown then dominates the appearance of the watch. Then you have to add weight to the case to reduce the effect of the crown, and thus you begin to destroy your whole conception. It's a simple matter to wind a watch once a day with a key, and I take the view that if a man hasn't got the tranquility of mind to do that once a day and observe the works going around, he doesn't deserve to have the watch anyway.
Supreme elegance, George. Just supreme.
Well,
just marvelous. Let's take a look at some of your equipment and how you do this.
Right. Let's walk down to the end of the workshop where the basic elements of wheel cutting are started. Now, you saw how fine those wheels are when they're finally finished and the teeth cut, Seth, but it starts off fairly roughly in this fashion. When I blank out the rough wheel, take the metal out of the centers to form the spokes. And I do it in this way because the only alternative is a complicated press tool that would take many, many hours to manufacture, and I might only want to cut one wheel with it. So I've devised this method of doing it, which works very well and is quite quick.
Yes, it doesn't pay to make a die to press them out, that's sure, George.
Now there's the rough blank, you see. Very rough at this stage, but the donkey work's taken out of it, the crossings are cut out. They've got to be filed smooth and clean, but all the work of sawing round here has been eliminated. You see, if you're going to use a press tool, it means a different size press tool for every wheel, and you never make two wheels alike in a watch.
Marvelous pantograph job, George.
Well,
it works very well.
Very successfully. But now, you see, we'll transfer this to a more delicate machine and cut the teeth round the edge, and then we're ready to move it down to the fine finishing section. So I'll show you the wheel cutting engine, which I keep round here. Now I'm cutting the teeth in the edge of the blank you saw made in the milling machine, and there'll be 96 in this particular wheel. Just a few more to go. And there it is done. Now I take the jig out of the lathe, and you can see the teeth cut in the periphery. I now have to take this down to the end of the workshop where we do the lighter finishing work, where it will have its hole drilled and centered and the spokes filed clean. But before we go down there, we'll stop at the case decorating machinery, which also is in this part of the workshop. This is a fairly old machine. It's early 19th century, Swiss, and constructed especially for engine turning patterns, barleycorn patterns on the backs of watch cases, or for cutting out the seconds parts of dials and decorating the inner surface with basket work patterns, or any pattern one chooses to use. It works in this way. You attach the work to the lathe, and this revolves, you see, if I turn the handle. And as it revolves, these multi-cams in rings called roses around here rest against this iron touch piece, and they're pressed against it by a spring. So as this rotates, it also rocks backwards and forwards and takes a wavy cut, which is then halved on a ratchet here and advanced on a ratchet here, and slowly the whole of the back of the case is covered with this fine, sparkling engine turn finish. And I'll give you an example of how it cuts the metal. You see, now I'm going to bring up this tool and simply press it against the work and turn the handle, and you see the swarf beginning to come off. And although it's rocking, oscillating, you can't see it very well because the oscillation is very, very small. And when I've finished that cut, I simply withdraw the tool, advance it one, halve it on the ring at the back, bring in the cutter and take another cut. And I continue all the way around there. And when I've finished, this piece of silver will have the same sparkling effect as you see on 19th century watch cases. Now, I like to use this finish because it resists fingerprints. The watches stay sparkling and clean while you're using them. Now, you can see I've done a few rows on there, and the effect is very bright and sparkling.
You make it sound easy, George. I know that that's not true.
Well, it's easy once, like most of these things, once you've got the hang of it, it's quite easy, but it does take some time to practice in order to get the perfect finish one requires. The difficulty is that the pressure on the cutter is by hand, and the minute variation in the pressure by hand on here will cause a variation in the depth of the cut. This variation is minute, only microns. And it won't show with an eyeglass, but when you study the general overall effect, you'll see these nasty rings. And it does take practice to learn how much pressure to put on here.
Yes.
But that is the chief difficulty with the technique.
There are very few people that ever try this. I know that.
Well, I think it's quite rare to find engine turners now. There are one or two in London, one or two very good ones, but they're the only turners I do know who will undertake to do that sort of work. I prefer to do it myself for the simple reason that I can engine turn a back or a dial when I want it, rather than have to get on somebody's waiting list. Well, that gives you some idea of the more basic processes towards producing the larger components of the watch, but then there's the question of turning in the small components, and this I do in an entirely separate part of the workshop, away from the larger machinery. These lathes here, small centre lathes, they're very much like the larger lathes we saw, and indeed they're no more precise than the larger lathes, but it is very much more convenient to fine-turn a small component in a small lathe, and so it's nice to have lathes of different sizes. After turning in here, for instance, a pinion, ready for mounting the wheel, one can turn fine pivots on here and then transfer it to this small grinding machine, which will grind the pivots on to very precise limits. The jewel holes, for instance, one would make the holes, say 12/100ths of a millimetre, and you can grind to 11/100ths of a millimetre on this stuff, thus allowing yourself 100th of a millimetre clearance. And it's very convenient to have a precise machine to do that.
You're watching the gauge on that, but I imagine your eye is telling you almost as much, isn't it, George?
Well, and the ear, you can hear the wheel whistling on the pivot, and you can judge when to lift off. And the technique is to, when you've got the gauge set and you run it, you continually turn this, and you hope when the pivot comes down to size, it just stops cutting, and then you get a polish on it. And a little practice you achieve that.
20 years practice.
Well, quite a lot. And then for the very finest work, of course, one always reverts to the earliest and perhaps the most primitive method of turning. But it is perhaps the only method which can guarantee absolutely 100% certainty. With machines like this, you have a limit. You work to a limit. It's a very, very small limit, no consequence. With machines like this, you have no limits, because you're working to dead centres and rotating the work. And I like to use this partly for sentimental reasons, because it was the old machine that was always used in watchmaking. Indeed, it was the only turning machine. And you see I have a wheel mounted in here at the moment, and it has a pin through the pulley to carry the wheel, and when I move the bow, like that, you see the wheel oscillates backwards and forwards. And this is a very convenient motion, especially for getting that beautiful black polish one likes to see on watch pinions. You see I take a dab of the polish, like this, here, and then I apply the polisher to the arbor of the wheel, and putting on a gentle pressure, because one doesn't want to break it, and then off we go. See, and I just move that like that, and there you can see the shine beginning to come up. And I needn't take this to its limit, but if I keep that up for long enough and then I change this for a slightly softer bell metal polish with some finer polish, then up will come the black luster. And all the time, no danger to the work, and no chance of putting it out of true.
That is indeed delicate work, George.
Well, you can do extremely delicate work on these, and I find it the most convenient way of doing delicate work, because you can take it in and out continuously without suffering any want of truth in the work. And of course, this thing, working with collets, will also damage small work. You see, you can grip the rough end of the work and turn what you want, but the parts in the collet will be damaged. This will not damage anything.
I've certainly taken a lot of your time, George, but I do appreciate it. It's been most interesting.
Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed it here. I've enjoyed having you, and it's been great fun explaining some of the techniques that go on in the watchmaker's workshop to somebody who understands something about watches.
Well, I do, but this is a lifetime of experience you've exposed to me, and I do appreciate it.
Well, I hope I haven't reached the end of it yet, you know, and say half a lifetime's experience.
Right. Thanks, George. We'll see you another day.